Hey everyone, welcome back to Kubrick Corner with me, Sean Wilson. So there's a really rather good horror thriller out at the moment, which some of you might have seen, some of you might be on the fence about. I'm talking about The Invisible Man, which is written and directed by Lee Whannell, who was actor co-writer of Saw, the first Saw, and stars Elisabeth Moss from The Handmaid's Tale and High Rise and Mad Men and Us, a terrific actor. And this in its essence is a kind of loose continuation of the aborted Universal Dark Universe franchise, which you might remember from a few years ago, which attempted to get up and running with the Tom Cruise movie The Mummy. The idea is that Universal as a studio were attempting to basically put a fresh lick of paint on their classic monster movie properties from the 1930s and 40s, like The Mummy, The Wolf Man, The Invisible Man. The Mummy was a huge disaster. It lost money, it got terrible reviews, it absolutely did not ignite the franchise like it was supposed to. The franchise was then put on ice, and there was also much mocking about the fact that there was a photoshopped image of all the various actors who were planned to star in the various properties. You had Tom Cruise, Javier Bardem, who was meant to be the Wolf Man, Johnny Depp, who was meant to be the Invisible Man, Russell Crowe, who was Dr. Jekyll slash Mr. Hyde in The Mummy. All of that came to nothing. Franchise was put on ice. The idea was that The Invisible Man was meant to be a kind of big budget Dark Universe movie with Johnny Depp. That obviously, they put the kibosh on that. Several years later, it's now kind of mutated and evolved and emerged in the form of a low budget $7 million movie starring Elisabeth Moss and, as I said, directed by Lee Whannell. And it's been a huge hit. It's taken about 70 million worldwide, and it's from Blumhouse. They've put their backing behind it, and it shows that Blumhouse have emerged in recent years as purveyors of low budget, high concept movies, which is that, contained within, movies that would probably barely reach the catering budget of major blockbusters. Enough ideas and strong acting and conceptual themes are in there to break out to a wide audience, and the films end up becoming very, very profitable indeed. You think a classic example of this would be Get Out, the Jordan Peele movie, which cost something like $4.5 million and took about 250 million worldwide, and obviously that won several Oscars as well. So Blumhouse have really emerged as this kind of like tour de force in the kind of low budget, high concept horror arena, and The Invisible Man is another very, very fine example of that, with some caveats which I'll get to. So Elisabeth Moss is Cecilia Cass, who is a woman escaping her abusive and violent husband, played by Oliver Jackson Cohen. There's a very tense sleeping with the enemy style escape sequence at the very, very beginning, in which Lee Whannell and Moss do a brilliant job of suggesting the history of abuse without ever playing out. We see Elisabeth Moss escaping the kind of palatial house that she shares with her husband, and although we don't see any acts of violence perpetuated against her, he is asleep in bed. We can tell from the urgency of her body language how important it is that she gets out of this situation without him detecting it. And that is writ large throughout Elisabeth Moss's performance throughout the whole of this film. She is what makes it click. There is a real kind of urgency and vitality to the performance that's in her body language, that's in her eyes, that's in her face. It's a really, really good performance, although obviously anyone who's seen the likes of The Handmaid's Tale will know this already. She's really emerged as a kind of figurehead for tenacious, resourceful, strong female characters in the kind of horror thriller arena. So what then happens is that she goes to stay with a friend played by Aldous Hodge to escape her husband, who apparently doesn't know where she is, and to put her life back together. She is then informed that her husband has apparently died off screen, and that she has inherited his vast fortune because he was a scientist, a pioneer in the field of optics, with a big lab at the house that she escapes at the beginning. So she thinks, oh, okay, great, something good has come out of this. But then very, very quickly she starts to suspect that something is off, and that maybe he isn't actually dead at all. And knowing what he was capable of, knowing not only his manipulative and evil and devious nature, but also what he was scientifically capable of, she starts to suspect that maybe she is not actually alone when she thinks she is. And the early stages of the film do a brilliant job of using what's called negative space within the frame. The idea is in the frame that there will be an area in which there doesn't appear to be anything going on, and that normally that is the area from which the audience's attention is distracted. It's like, don't look over there, look over here at the actor in the centre of the frame. But the movie very, very deliberately kind of pans over to a corner of the room where, you don't have anything apart from a bit of set decoration, and it's fantastically unnerving. and the first half of the movie does that very, very well. And what the movie kind of does is it sets itself up as an abuse story. I mean, this isn't so much a story about the invisible man as the visible woman. This is the woman who is suffering as a result, or maybe not, at the hands of the invisible man. And that tweaking of the formula to give it that kind of topicality and freshness is very, very well done. And again, initially, the movie does a very good job of playing around with the ambiguity of, is Cecilia mad, or does she know her husband better than she thinks, and is he actually present in the room? And the movie plays around with that very, very well. I kind of wish they'd sustain that a bit more. And they sustain it for a fair amount. They sustain it for about, I'd say, 2/3 of the movie, which is more than I was expecting. And then the thing is with these things, I mean, as you get into the kind of final act of the movie, the final third, it does become more expository. It becomes more reliant on effects. Although one could argue that because The Invisible Man does, in essence, owe itself to a science fiction story anyway, to a H.G. Wells story from 1897, one could say, well, the descent into more kind of science fiction cliche isn't necessarily a betrayal of what the story's about. In fact, what that's doing is it's kind of honouring that. And I kind of think, yeah, I get that. I just kind of wish that within those parameters the story had more focus, because more and more characters start to become involved. Things start happening which don't get as much clarity in the storyline as you want, and it starts to become a little bit bitty and a little bit messy, compared to that brilliantly creepy kind of opening half, in which what you get is, you know, a corner of a room or an empty corridor at night becomes inexplicably terrifying. But what I will say is that Elisabeth Moss holds it together brilliantly. Elisabeth Moss is what makes this work, and she is like a really kind of tremulous yet strong character. And even when the storyline becomes messy and choppy, she pulls you through it, and you realise it's her story. It's a story about a woman overcoming past trauma. That just happens to be, that story happens to be within the context of an Invisible Man movie that is obviously, whose influence has stretched right the way back through cinema, back to the 1933 Claude Rains film, which had very, very pioneering special effects that are still astonishing to this day. She is what makes it work. So I have to say, I enjoyed the movie a lot. I thought it was very thought-provoking. I think it could have done with more discipline at the end, but Elisabeth Moss is the powerhouse behind it, and go and see it for her performance. If you have already seen it, drop me a comment here at Kubrick Corner, and I'll see you soon. Bye.